today on Online for Authors, I'm chatting with Katie Chambers about all things editing, especially for indie authors. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you for having me.
I'm super excited to have you. Before we really dive in, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why it is that you are able to talk to us about editing and the problems that are found in indie manuscripts?
Yeah, absolutely. So originally I was an English teacher and I thought that's what I was going to be for life. That's what I was born to be. I love teaching. At my core, I love teaching. But it didn't really work with having kids because the kind of teacher I was, I threw myself in the job. I had no energy left over. So I had to find something I could do and have time to still be a mom. So I got into editing. And I took a lot of training for it and I love it. I love it. And I started off nonfiction editing at first for indie authors because I didn't have formal fiction editing training. I love to read, but I knew I needed actual, training.
Right.
So I started off with nonfiction and then I got to formal fiction editing training. And now I do both nonfiction and fiction. For indie authors, I work with a lot of first-time authors because I am a teacher. I'm okay with kind of the extra hand holding or the kind of teaching required to help those that are new. So that's kind of my niche there. And then I get so much work. I actually have a agency now. I have a team of editors who I kind of trained to edit in my style. They were all great editors, but I wanted to kind of have my style so that I could just say we all kind of do this kind of editing style. And so, so it's really fun.
Fantastic. So what I'd love to talk about is you had brought up the fact that there were common mistakes found in manuscripts and that these were the kinds of mistakes that maybe the author could fix themselves before hiring an editor, if only we understood what we were looking for. So let's talk about the top mistakes that you find, and then not just what you find, but what as an author I could do about those kinds of mistakes that are being found in those manuscripts.
Okay, absolutely. So I'll talk about we'll go from grammar to kind of higher, bigger picture mistakes.
Okay, sounds great.
Cover the gamut there. So if we're going to talk fiction, is that mostly what you're
mostly fiction authors. I do have some memoir, but that's more of a creative nonfiction.
Yeah, okay. So then I'll focus on that. Yeah. Okay. So when you look at the common punctuation grammar mistakes that I see from fiction authors, it's knowing when to use a period versus when to use a comma with dialogue tags versus action beats. So if you're tagging it, if you have a verb of speech, said, talked, whispered, yelled, then it's a comma. But if you have giggled, that's not a verb of speech. That is an action that they're doing. So then it's a period before the tag. You have a dialogue, period, she giggled. So this is a common mistake I see a lot. Because if it's not a verb of speech and it's actually just an action that they're doing, then you need to use a period. And this is something that if you can go through and kind of clean up, and obviously if you miss some instances, your editor is there to clean up. But I have authors where I'm everything is a comma. And I have to go in and put periods, all their action beats are commas. So it would reduce the cost of editing if they could go through and kind of find, all right, this is not a verb of utterance. This is not a verb of speech. This is actually an action they did. So I'm going to use a period. And then dangling modifiers are humorous errors that we like to make. So it often comes when you start a sentence with an ing verb. And there's a myth out there that you can't start a sentence with an ing verb. And that is not true. It's just that it needs to be done correctly. And often it's not done correctly. And so then people avoid it altogether, but they can make for great sentences. But the thing is when you say something while walking to work, a police car whizzed by. Well, that sounds like the police car was walking to work.
Right. Yeah. The police car was walking to work, right?
Yes. The very first word after that ing phrase needs to be who did the action of the ing phrase. So if the very first word after that is not the subject of that ing phrase, then you have that dangling modifier. So don't be afraid to use ing phrases like your ing verbs, but just when using them, make sure that your first verb, the first noun afterwards is the person who did it. because those kind of make for some humorous. Editors like to find the humorous, the funniest dangling modifiers that they can.
Right. Well, and what's funny is I understand what a dangling modifier was, but I don't know that I would have been able to so succinctly tell someone how to fix it, which is if you have the ing verb, that noun need to be the one doing it. Yeah. It's like, oh my gosh, how simple is that then to go back and fix now that you understand exactly how to fix it?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the funny ones I found, flashing lightning and thunder, the bunny struggled through the storm. I was like, oh, the bunny can flash lightning and doesn't.
Whoa, is that amazing?
Bunny. And then let's see, another kind of grammar one is ellipses versus em dash in dialogue. So like if they're trailing, like if someone's talking, right, and they kind of trail off, which we do sometimes, we're like, I don't know if I want to say the rest, or we're pausing because we get distracted. That's an ellipses. The em dash is if you get cut off or interrupted. Like you start to say something and then you switch gears and say something else. Or you say something and another person comes in and interrupts. And along that point, you don't even have to say she interrupted if you have that em dash. Like just have the dialogue, em dash, and then the next person's dialogue without she interrupted, because then that's like redundant because the em dash does that.
Right. And not only that, to say she interrupted kind of pulls you out of the story.
It totally does. Right. Because like I'm in it when I feel the interruption happening. Right. I want to feel that interruption. So yeah, but I often find that mix up between when to use an em dash versus when to use ellipses. So it's trail off versus cut off.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are some of the grammar things you can go through and look for. A lot of the word choice things you can look for is filter words like wondered, realized, hoped, knew, decided. These are all words that filter the story through the narration. And we don't want, as readers, we want to be immersed in the narration, and we're going to be immersed more if we're in their head. And when we talk, when we're telling our story or we talk, we don't just, well, I realized this. No, you just say what you realize, like, Right. And as the reader, we know that they're realizing it, but you don't need to use that word because that word pulls us out, because now we're being, the story's being filtered through a narration versus being immersive. Yeah.
Okay.
When I'm thinking,
is there a list of filter words? Like as an author, can I go and get a list and then do the search find so that I can see how I've done that?
Yes. If you just Google common filter words, I have a blog on it. Lots of editors have blogs on it. There's tons of blogs on filter words. So you'd find a master list, and find and replace. So instead of like, Felipe realized he'd forgotten his tool belt. It's just, he reached for his tool belt. Crap. How could he forget that? Right. Now I'm more immersed than, he's realizing something. I'm actually real time seeing him realize it.
Exactly. I love that. Okay.
Yeah. And then body parts are another word choice you can look for. For example, when you say like, her hand reached for the keys in her pocket. Well, I'm pretty sure it wasn't her feet. I'm pretty sure it wasn't her head. We do a lot of naming, and it's okay to do it occasionally. It's not like it's bad to ever have it, but sometimes we go overkill with like saying which body part did what, or like she shrugged her shoulders. I mean, pretty sure she didn't shrug her elbows. Like I know she's
right. You could just shrug.
You could just shrug.
Right.
Yeah.
You can just reach. You can just shrug. You can just. Right.
Yes, you can just nod your head, You
can even just squint, because one cannot squint their ears.
Correct. Yes.
Got it.
So it's just looking for those unnecessary body part naming.
Okay.
Just, you can take that out. Another word choice one is like false simultaneity, like two things happening at the same time that couldn't happen at the same time. This also often happens when you start with ing words. So this is another thing to look out for. Don't avoid them all together. Just fix the errors with it. But like opening the door, she rushed down the steps. Now that's not a dangling modifier because she's the one that opened the door.
But she can't open and rush at the same time.
Yeah. You have to first do one before you do the other.
Okay.
So that's another thing to look for that I find a lot. And again, don't feel like, oh my gosh, I need to find these all, because obviously that's what an editor comes in to do. But the more you find and the cleaner the manuscript you have, the less the editing is going to cost. And the more you learn as a writer too. You grow as a writer when you're digging into these things.
Well, the other thing that I have found for myself is that if I give a cleaner manuscript to my editor, we can focus on bigger things.
Yes.
You know, like we can go a little deeper and we can make my manuscript a little better because we didn't have to spend a lot of time dealing with dangling participles.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
So I actually offer a combined package, which I do to meet authors on a budget, since I work with a lot of first-time indie authors.
Right.
And that is where I do copy editing and developmental editing. And a lot of editors will be like, no, never do that. It's just the way my brain works that I'm able to offer that. But again, I tell them obviously the quality is going to go up if I'm doing them separately. But because that's my most popular package, and it's a way to get both some big picture feedback and to make sure it's not riddled with errors, and you've got errors fixed and you've got some big picture feedback. I'm probably going to miss a few more because I'm doing both, but it's a way to kind of make sure that the quality is good on both ends. Maybe not the best, but good on both ends. But I recently did a combined package for an author who had taken care of most of these things. Like, he'd gone through and read my blogs and did a lot of self-editing. So even with doing my combined package, like, I felt like it was almost the quality of doing them separately because I could focus so much on big picture. Right. Because this was taken care of. And then speaking of big picture, a few big picture things that are common things that authors could look out for. Info dumping. Info dumping is huge. And this is where, like, you just kind of drop a chunk of information into into the reader's lap. You're just telling them stuff. And it's not and sometimes that stuff is important to know. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it just can be deleted entirely. And it was important for you to know as the author in order to shape your story. Right. But it wasn't important for the reader. But if it is important to the reader, you can integrate it into the action. My favorite way to do so is through like free and direct speech. If you're writing from third person. So I recently had this story that they had an info dump of like the train station. They were telling about the train station and the town that they were going to and what the train was like. And instead of just telling me these facts that were almost written like a report, we instead made it the character's thoughts. And we did it to free and direct speech. So the character was saying like, this is, she was thinking about, how did I word it? I don't remember the exact wording, but it was something like, oh, these leather seats are the worst. If I have to sit on here for 3 more hours, she's talking about the train.
So you're getting the whole information.
Yes. So we found out about the town too. Like, she was talking about how she loved to shop and she's like, oh, nothing will be open in this dreary town. Figures, So we're getting the facts, but we're not getting it info dumped. Right.
I read a book and had the author on my podcast, and we actually discussed this. I felt like I was reading 2 books. I was reading a wonderful novel and I was reading a history book.
Yes.
And they would go back and forth and back and forth. And so I talked about the fact that if he could find a way to take the history book and bring it into the action and let me see it from the character's point of view, instead of giving me a 2.5-page dump on whatever was happening in Germany at that time, that I would have never felt like I was reading 2 different books. That the novel portion of this book, where I was with the characters, I really enjoyed. And I enjoyed the character development and I enjoyed the storyline. And then I waded through the history book.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like that used to be the style. If you look at the classics.
Right.
And when I taught English, I always had to tell my students, like, I promise you're going to like this book. You just have to get through the first 3 chapters of backstory and setting the scene. That's not the style of modern readers anymore. We don't have the patience for that. Okay. So we want to be immersed in, we still want to know that information.
Yes.
You can tell me about the characters, through the actions they take, and I can learn about their backstory. I mean, maybe I can learn that they were bullied as a kid because now as an adult, when someone says something mean, they kind of have a panic attack and refer back to it. And I get immersed into their panic attack emotion rather than being told they were bullied as a kid and being told their history.
Exactly. My first book was about Ukraine. And there was a lot of history that you kind of need to know to understand what was happening in the 1970s in Ukraine.
Right.
But that can get dull. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. And so I had two characters and they were getting ready to vote for the first time. And I had them discussing options. Well, what about so-and-so? Yeah, but you know, da, 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 da. And so I was able to bring things in a way that you didn't realize you were learning anything.
Yes, because you were immersed in their discussion and their dialogue.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. That actually brings me to one point. The way you handled it, perfect. I did want to say sometimes dialogue is not a way to fix info dumping if it's as you know, Bob dialogue, right?
Right.
So I do
as you know. Yeah. And then info dump.
Yes. So I have had some authors be like, oh, I'm going to remove this info dump because I'm going to put it in action because dialogue is action. But really they're discussing like as if it's a dystopian and you want us to know the rules of the world. And literally they're like discussing the rules of the world. Well, they live in that world. They know the rules of the world. Right. They're not going to be like talking about, well, as you know, and not that they say as you know, but they'll be like, well, our curfew is at 11. So we have to make sure that we're in our house. Like they know that. Right. You know? Right. So dialogue is a way to fix info dumping as long as it's like, because in your instance, they're discussing who they want to vote for. And that's natural dialogue. Right. We naturally discuss the politics going on. But to tell the rules of the society or to tell something that both the characters know, it is still a form of info dumping. Now it's just info dumping in dialogue form where we're like, really, the characters are not going to say this to each other.
Right. It's got to be a natural fix and it has to come up. And sometimes even, for instance, he had one where he was talking about these silos that like popped up out of the ground. And he went into a lot of detail and we were hearing the metal they were made of and how much they weighed and the length they were, none of which was necessary. Mm-hmm. They could have been immense. Yeah. And, you know, and so we could have had her, I said, we could have had her walking when one of them came up out of the ground in, you know, next to the park. Right. Where they come out and she could have seen it and been startled at the immense size that, you know, that it was overwhelming to her, however you could put that.
Yeah. The character reacting naturally in real time.
And then we know that this thing is huge. And then she looks and they're popping up everywhere. Now we know that there's lots of them. Yes. Right. Yes. And we don't have to know what metal it was or the exact length.
Right. I can tell when authors have a passion or a knowledge, extreme knowledge on a topic, and they like to show that they have such knowledge on that topic. And sometimes I'm like, we really don't have to know. I mean, I know you like to bake, but we don't really need to know in this moment, like exactly how she measured everything out and how her intuition came to it. Like it didn't play a role in the book. So I could tell the author was a baker. Like, I tell you have a passion for this. That is excellent. We're not as interested as you are. Sorry. Right. Yeah. The thing about info dumping is when it's long. It's okay if it's like a few sentences of facts because you obviously can't dramatize everything. Right. We can't put everything into real-time action because that would exhaust your readers, right? We do have to have some narrative summary. And so it's okay to sneak in like a line or two, you know, as long as it doesn't feel like, okay, now I'm going to read your report, but a line or two of telling of a fact, fine. But it's when it just feels like, you know, we've halted the story.
Right. We've halted the story so that now we can discuss the wallpaper for the next 3 paragraphs. Right. Yeah.
Unless you're writing the short story, the wallpaper. Right. That wallpaper's creepy. But yes. So yeah, if you wanted to Google info dumping, there is editors write. I mean, I have several blogs on it, and I know other editors have several blogs on it, and authors themselves have blogged on it. And so you can kind of see examples of before and after to help you kind of learn how to find it and how to fix it. Right. And then same with the next thing, which is head hopping.
I'm bad at head hopping.
Yes.
I'm constant. My editor says to me all the time, Terry, you've done it again. I know, I'm sorry.
I recently had a discussion with my author. She's like, but isn't that good that I'm giving them the perspective of other characters? And she's pointing to classic literature that uses omniscient point of view and showing when they're doing it. I'm like, but you're not really writing an omniscient. You've established this deep, limited third, and we're following this character, and now all of a sudden we got the thoughts of this character. And so if you've established omniscient, which is hard to do, true omniscient is harder to do, and it's not as popular as it once was, although it works for some genres very well. But yeah, I mean, we do want to know about the other characters, obviously, but we want to know about them filtered through the viewpoint of your main character, or even your two main characters. If you have alternate, one chapter's in this character's point of view, right? And you can even switch point of view in a given scene as long as you have a scene break, and as long as it's not like this scene is this short, and now I'm going into this character. Now I'm popping back into that one. That's too short.
Because then it gets crazy.
Right. Yes. But if you have like a good long, like several page scene, and then you have a scene break and you switch into the other character's point of view, that's fine too. It's just some clear indication that now we're moving into another character's point of view. We've spent a significant time in this character, and now we've spent some significant time in this character. So it's not whiplash.
Exactly.
Yes. So head hopping often comes when you want to say how a character reacted to what they said. I can't know the thoughts of someone when I'm talking to them. I don't really know what they're thinking, but if it's on their face, sure, I can tell when my husband's mad at what I said.
Yes. But you don't know his exact thoughts.
Right. So
you don't know that he's thinking, Katie, I cannot believe that you said that right. You don't have any idea what his actual thought is, but exactly. you could read a facial expression, or you could read a body language. Right? Yes.
And so you can report on that. So it's not like we can't know the other character's emotions, but it has to be through what your point of view character can see and tell, and I can tell my husband, he gets that shut down look, like I've been talking way too long. And so he's not even hearing what I'm saying.
Right.
That I can tell. But what is he thinking about in that moment? I don't know. Does his mind start thinking about electrical engineering or his project he's building? I don't know.
Did it just go to nothingness? It's who knows?
Because guys do that. They have a nothing box. I don't understand.
I don't understand it either. But that's a whole nother podcast.
Thinking about absolutely nothing. What? Yeah. So I mean, again, you can Google head hopping. So these are just things like info dumping, head hopping, filter words. Google, look for them, learn about, and then as you're self-editing, look for these instances, and then do the best you can. And then obviously your editor can come in and point out, okay, well, there's still some head hopping here, because it's okay if you're going to miss some. That's what we're here for. But again, as clean as it can be before giving to us, the better. And then, of course, the big one that's talked about all the time, but the advice is like kind of cliche and doesn't mean much unless you really understand it. And that's like show, don't tell.
Show, don't tell. Yeah,
right.
I knew you were going to say it.
Yes. And it's really show and tell, honestly, because there's times to show, there's times to tell. It's not like your whole book needs to be show. No. I really recommend the Understanding Show, Don't Tell and Really Getting It, that book by Janice Hardy. Okay. I love that the title even says, and really getting it, because that advice is out there, but it's misinterpreted as to what show, don't tell really means.
Right.
And it's also just the cliche advice, right, that you give authors and they're like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do here.
Well, and I'm in a couple of different writing groups, and that often comes up, and people try to explain from what they think they understand, but everybody walks away going, I think, sort of. Yeah, it's a hard concept. It's very easy to say show, don't tell, and it's much harder to explain to someone what that means and how to avoid telling versus showing.
Yes. Yeah. I what I do a lot, my style of editing, because the teacher in me, and some authors would hate this that would make them cry, but I model it in the first, like directly in the text rather than in a comment aside, so they can see it integrated in the story. And for some authors, like, oh my gosh, you changed too much, but it's really just a suggestion, right? Like, please change it into your own. Right. But I like to model because it is a hard concept. So I will, maybe in the first 3 or 4 chapters, every time I feel like the showing really needs to be there, I might rewrite a paragraph and a paragraph or two to show how you can really show the emotions of this moment and get that deeper character interiority. And then later I'll just flag it for them to, use my models. But I know some authors are like, you touched too much of my precious words. But again, it's a suggestion. It's not a please use mine. And it's like, if you have a better way of doing this, absolutely tweak what I put.
Right.
But it's just a model because it is a hard concept.
It is a hard concept. And I know that I've gotten better as I've gone along, but it's still something that in my first drafts, the amount of telling that I do is significant.
Mm-hmm. It is. The first draft is for you.
Yeah, well, that's good because that first draft, nobody should see that.
Yes, first draft you write for yourself. You get the story out. And it doesn't matter if it's all telling and like a boring report because you're just getting out the story. Right. And then you can go in and shape it. But yeah, I do highly recommend that, understanding show, don't tell, and really getting it. And then also there's, I think there's the Self-Editing for Fiction Writers book by Rennie Brown and David King. They have some discussion. I don't know if they do. The very first chapter is show and tell. Okay. And they have some clear examples, and Janice Hardy's books too does as well. And I feel like once you read their chapter of show, don't tell in the Self-Editing for Fiction Writers and Janice Hardy's book, you have a much clearer picture because they get very clear on what it is and what it isn't. And they'll give you passages that many authors and readers will think is showing, but it is still not, and why it's still not.
And why it's not. And I like that. I like that idea. And guys, I will have those books in the show notes for you so that you'll be able to look and grab those because those are important. Yeah. Well, wonderful. Do you have any other great tips that you need to share with us, Katie?
Oh, I would just say about dialogue. The other thing that you can look for is, I know people like variety, and I like variety. I talk a lot about variety, but when it comes to dialogue tags, the fancy dialogue tags really just pull you out of the story. Like said,
right. It is so interesting because I have heard both. I have heard that you should just say said. You don't need anything else. And then I have heard other people say dialogue tags are where it's at. And it's how you get people to understand what's actually happening. And it's like, oh my gosh, those are diametrically opposed.
They are. And you know what? You're not going to appeal to every reader.
Exactly.
And there's no like written laws that are like, this is must do. It's just, there's best practices out there. Right. And in the editing community, I would say we lean more towards, in the editors I have chatted with and the blogs I have seen, we lean more toward, if you want to, you shouldn't need a dialogue tag that's fancy because your words and your action beats and should show that.
You should already know.
We should already know that, it is okay to use like a whispered or a murmured, but when you start getting into like the, I don't know, like retorted, ordered, challenged, exclaimed, it's like snarled. Then I notice. The thing is as readers, we tend to notice that more. And so then we realize we're being told a story. Whereas said, we don't realize we're being told the dialogue because said just fades in the background, Whereas those words will come out more forefront. But again, there is no hard or fast rules. There are some readers. I'm sure there are some readers that are like, I hate when the book only uses said because I love those. But I just know for me, I like to be more immersed. And if I feel like, okay, if you're going to say that he snarled that information, well, I should be able to tell that from the tone, like from the word choice you use conveys that tone.
The word choice, the way his facial expressions were, the whole tone of the scene and what is going on and everything should let you know that came out as a snarl.
Right. I mean, when we're watching a movie, for example, an actor doesn't stop and go, by the way, I snarled that line. Yeah. we hear it.
Right. Right.
But obviously we can't hear their voice. So you have to show that through the words.
Right.
But yeah.
I love that. I love that. Well, Katie, this has been wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Well, I learned a lot. I know that my listeners are going to learn a lot. So guys, she owns Beacon Point, right? Is that the name of your? Mm-hmm. And so are you taking people now? Are you okay? So reach right out to Beacon Point. I will have that in my show notes as well as the books that she suggested. And I want to thank you so much for being with me today. This has been wonderful. And I think that this is going to be one of those episodes that my authors listen to over and over. It had a lot of value in it.
The teacher in me is like, I still need to teach.
I know. I love that. I love that.
And I will just say, I have a newsletter.
Fantastic!
Where I give a lot of tips for authors and for editors too, because I teach editors how to run their business. But I give a lot of tips for authors, not just from me, but from other editors and other industry people. So I like to curate.
Fantastic. And they can get on that newsletter by going to your website.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the website is
beaconpointservices.org.
Super.
Yeah.
Super. That'll be in the show notes as well.
Okay,
thank you so much, Katie, for your help today.
Yes, thank you. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.